Hi, my name is Xiye Bastida, and I am a climate activist. You are watching eTown.
So please welcome Xiye Bastida.
Xiye, welcome to eTown.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. First of all, Helen mentioned that you grew up outside of Mexico City. Can you tell us about your hometown and what you remember about, I guess, a couple of years of drought and then some flooding?
Yeah, I grew up in a small town called San Pedro Tultepec. It's a small town, about 10,000 people. And, for a long time, about 2 or 3 years, my town suffered from drought, mainly because Mexico City takes out water from my town for the people of Mexico City. And all of a sudden, one summer it just started raining and it wouldn't stop. And we saw severe flooding. The water was up to my knees. And a lot of people lost their businesses, their stores. They had to look for jobs in Mexico City. And it's something that I, at the time, didn't correlate with the climate crisis. But looking back and looking at the devastation, I saw as a direct impact of what's going on in the world, and mainly how the climate crisis disproportionately affects smaller communities, low-income communities.
Yeah. And you're also a member of the Otomi Toltec tribe?
Yes, so it's called the Otomi Indigenous group. We don't really have tribes in Mexico,
okay.
And my name, Xiye, means rain, soft rain in Otomi. So it's
beautiful.
Something that
And so did you grow up with, I guess, a more indigenous or native sense of nature and the natural world and relationship to the environment?
Yeah, something that I know for a fact is that indigenous philosophy, the fact that you have to take care of the earth because the earth takes care of you, is something that was ingrained in me since I was a child and growing up. And so I see that as me always being a climate activist in life, because it's not a hobby for me. It's part of who I am, and it's only been called climate activism very recently. But I've always emphasized the importance of reciprocity. We give to the earth, and the earth gives us, and that's what we need to do.
Yeah, and how old were you when you and your family moved to New York City?
I was 13.
13, and so Hurricane Sandy happened, I guess, at some point, and you were able to you knew that that kind of devastation isn't limited to just small communities.
Yeah, so I did not experience Hurricane Sandy, but I saw what it had done to Long Island because my godfather lives there, and he showed me how homes were just wiped out. And I saw this as a global sign that the climate crisis is happening everywhere.
So you see that when you're 13, you're in a new city, kind of, I guess, a recent immigrant, going to school, maybe with limited language skills at first. How in the world did you feel empowered enough in the midst of this to take on responsibility of really becoming a leader around this issue?
It all started when I first went to my first environmental club meeting, which started in the middle of my 10th grade. And I saw that kids were looking at documentaries about the ocean and were being taught how to recycle. And I knew that only 9% of plastic gets recycled. I knew that if we see devastating movies about, ocean acidification, what are we going to do about it as kids? We can't vote. We don't have a stakeholder power in these industries. So I didn't think that was the right focus. So I took leadership of the environmental club the year after, and I started to organize my classmates to go up to Albany to advocate for climate legislation. And that led to me realizing that politicians just want to get reelected and don't really want to act on long-term climate action, which is why when I saw that Greta Thunberg called for the first global climate strike, I decided to organize my school.
Yeah.
And I got over 600 kids to walk out on March 15th.
Yeah. And again, that's a lot of responsibility for a young person. You probably had to give up some aspects of being a high school teenage person. Like I don't know, did you have to make choices like that?
Yes, so for example, I used to do gymnastics, I used to play the guitar. I don't have time for that anymore. But now I get to travel and see you guys, so that's amazing.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some, the climate strike in last September. That must have felt like a really important accomplishment. 150 countries, millions,
7.4 million.
7.4 million people, yeah. So, of course, and your experience lobbying the state legislature in Albany, these are successes, right?
Yes, definitely. For example, we got New York City to declare a climate emergency as a result of the youth movement. Now our mayor says there won't be any future fossil fuel infrastructure, citing the youth movement as a push for his decision. And September 20th, we wanted to make the strike intergenerational. That was the essence of the strike with us. And it is because we know that even though the climate crisis is going to affect my generation and future generations the most, we can't do this alone. We need everybody from all ages, all sectors, and all levels of government to do their best to address this crisis.
Yeah. In the midst of those successes and with your efforts saying, we all need to do this, it's tough to point to sort of tangible bite-size progress that's being made. Of course, you mentioned a couple, but does that wear you down a little bit when you say, boy, this is really big, but at the same time, CO2 levels aren't coming down, and fossil fuel consumption in other countries especially is not going down. And so does that? How do you stay cheered up in the midst of all this?
It is, very hard to see all these news coming in, and we have higher temperatures being recorded, and we have more ice melting. It is hard for us, especially as kids, to be so aware of all the time. But what gives me hope is the action that we've been able to accomplish. A year ago, no one knew about the youth climate movement. No one called the climate crisis. We called it climate change. Those shifts in narrative, those shifts in language, they're going to change the world, and we are already doing that. Mm-hmm. We've seen the movement skyrocket in the past year, and it's not going to stop.
Yeah, that's great. In case you just tuned in, you're listening to eTown. I'm here with Xiye Bastida. You know that you're in a solar-powered facility. We're making enough power right on site to where we didn't even bring any fossil fuels into the building. And again, the scale of this issue is so much bigger than us or eTown Hall. So can you give us an example of ways that you might break down the challenges in ways that you could actually help people find ways to get engaged and become active?
Yeah, so I think that one of the big lies that we have been told is that we are in a climate crisis because we didn't recycle or because you forgot to, turn off the light.
Right.
And that is not what we want to say. The climate crisis is not any individual's fault. But of course, we need everybody to do something. And for example, imagine that you have a cup of coffee. Every cup of coffee that we get has a lining of plastic inside. We cannot expect every person to take out the lining and then recycle the cup, but we need to ask the company to just make it without plastic. That is what structural change means. And that is what we as civil society can advocate for. We can advocate for our industries and the corporate sector to just do things the right way.
That's great. And that's a small example, yeah. To be savvy consumers, demanding consumers, and it doesn't necessarily mean that these products will either cost more or be harder to make. It just means that they will be better, and they'll better for all of us. I know, of course, leadership matters, and especially in an election year. So are you seeing environmental or renewable energy platforms of presidential candidates that are changing as a result of youth activism?
Yes, definitely. I remember going to the climate crisis town hall hosted by CNN. I met 6 presidential candidates, and one of them called the Sunrise Movement the Sunshine Movement. So they can't be president. But I have seen that because of the youth movement and us going to their offices and saying, what is your plan? What are you doing for the planet, for the country, for our future? As a result of that, we are seeing much more bold climate plans coming out. An example is, Joe Biden's plan. He had no plan, and now he has a reasonable plan. Like, not reasonable, but
There are other leaders on this issue. You've met some of them. You've been introduced by people like Al Gore, Leonardo DiCaprio. What about them? Are they helpful in this conversation?
I think that if you are a public figure, you have much more of a responsibility to speak up. And I am so grateful that there are so many people with influence who are speaking up about this. And what you see is that the youth movement is empowering them to keep going. Because imagine being Al Gore and having a documentary that's been telling the truth for so many years, and nothing had changed. To see that information and that theory of change is being galvanized by the youth movement is a huge inspiration for him to keep going. And his experience inspires us as well. And that is where intergenerational inspiration comes in, and that's why we need everybody.
That's great. That's good. It's a good example. And of course, it's really nice and heartening to think that we may, in fact, have leadership who respect things like facts and science. That would be refreshing.
Yeah.
Could happen. Could happen. I know that for Greta, there's been a lot of pushback and people pointing fingers at her and saying, "Wow, you're just, you're being irrational," or "You're being," and that naturally there's going to be pushback. Have you experienced that too?
Yeah.
Criticism and.
Yeah, my conversations with climate deniers are usually, the climate has always been changing. And so when I get that feedback, I say, okay, let's pretend that our temperatures are not rising. Let's pretend that we don't have 416 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere. What about air pollution, water pollution, plastic pollution? Even if the temperatures are not rising, why are we depending on a system that is contaminating every aspect of our lives? And when you look at it from that angle, you get them thinking about their whole way of denying science, because everything is driven by data and science, and that's what we use to back up our facts. But it's also about appealing to what somebody cares about, which is health a lot of the times, most of the times. Mm-hmm. And yeah, just looking at it from all different angles is always the best way to talk to people.
Yeah. Well, it's inspiring to see someone like you, your age, to sort of carry this message, because I think if you ask everybody every older person, every person in a position of power, and you ask them a simple question: do you love your kids? Do you love your grandkids? Do you hope for them a life that's safe and productive? They would all say, of course. So I think that conversation being carried forward by someone like you who represents that generation is so powerful. I appreciate the fact that you're doing it. I hope you're holding up okay under the banner of being America's Greta and so on. A lot of eyes are on you, and people are thinking about the words you're saying. Are there things in particular that we can do to help you at this point?
Honestly, we cannot put our efforts into convincing everybody that the climate crisis is real or here. But what we can do is deepen our own understanding of the facts to increase our consciousness. So, do you know how the climate crisis impacts transportation and food systems and businesses? And we don't all know that. And we cannot try to have two facts in our heads and go around trying to convince people, when if you can work on your own understanding, you can work on solutions that are truly, truly reflective of the holistic approach that we need to take.
Yeah, so education.
Education.
Yeah, learn as much as we can, digest it, carry it around. There's a local fellow here you probably know, Xutezgat Martinez, and he started an organization called Youth Guardians, and that was really an inspiring inspiring opportunity for us to share his story on this show. But it's really great to see that it's being picked up and carried by more and more young people. And we want to do whatever we can to help you carry this message. We'll try to do our best to clean this up as best we can. And meanwhile, I hope you'll keep in touch.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being with us. Xiye Bastida of New York City, climate activist, educator, champion, fighting the climate crisis for all of us. Hi, this is Nick Forster from eTown. If you want to stay up to date with all the performances, interviews, and behind-the-scenes footage, click the subscribe button. Thanks.